Spread throughout the few plains of the jungle with lands flat enough to accommodate them were large Imperial bases. Each one was buzzing with activity as vehicles were being prepped, soldiers corralled, and supplies being distributed. Engineers worked on clearing as much of the jungle and flattening as much of the mountainous areas they possibly could to expand bases or build more. To the Imperials' misfortune, they had to assault a hostile and contested jungle that was over 2 million square miles. And to the horror of Imperial commanders, in the center of this jungle was the location of a lizard megacity. A megacity that held and protected orbital guns. Every main supply route leading to it was heavily mined or contested, and making a new road meant fighting in the jungle with no heavy support. 30 legions surrounded the megacity, and conducted a multitude of operations to get near it, all of which resulted in defeat and an enormous loss of life. Entire legions of 30 to 50,000 soldiers were stopped dead in their tracks, taking at least 10% casualties each. The Scourge weren't stupid. They armed every lizard in that city and weaponized anything they could. It was a nightmare for the Imperials. For 6 months they'd been in deadlock with the Scourge, with only probing actions or light skirmishes. The worst front was Otartha's, a highway leading straight into the heart of the city, which ran through the jungle, twisting and turning around small mountains. It was the most heavily defended route with only 50 meters of width and heavy jungle on both flanks. The road went on for thousands of kilometers and was littered with small towns and dens that held defenders that would fight till the last man. However, Otartha was forced, once more, to lead her people into the hands of death. A lone Tari was leaning against an IFV, infantry fighting vehicle. No matter what army it was, the theme was to hurry up and wait. Her dark gray hands were working nervously, trying to tie her long white hair into a knot that would comfortably fit her Imperial light armor. The standard issue armor for frontline soldiers was solid white or blue power armor, but in the jungle mud it proved useless due to its weight. The key to surviving in battle was not protection, but mobility, and sinking almost a meter down was a death sentence. In this environment, it was deemed that the light armor the humans used was the best option. A simple piece of ballistic fabric with insertable ballistic and ablative plates on the front and back. The front of that armor held a nameplate and a rank plate. Elitaria Tempestria, Corporal. "Emperor, damn it, get in there!" Tempestria angrily hissed. Members of her mixed platoon were amused by her struggle. "You should have just cut your hair short like the rest of us, Tempestria," an ashen gray Tory with short black hair said as she walked up behind her to help. She had to undo it and not her hair. She should have cut it short like everyone else. "Shut up, Private, I still outrank you," she grunted in exasperation and slipped her full-face helmet on. Her friend stood at attention and saluted Elitaria in blatant sarcasm. "Yes, ma'am. Private Luliandra Sayathril reporting for duty." Everyone was laughing as her hood started to boot up. Every friendly soldier was being highlighted in green with their name and rank, as well as names of the vehicles and their commander. Elitaria turned her head to look at her friend and expanded the details option. Personnel: Private First Class Liliandra Sayathril, Platoon Sergeant, Sergeant First Class Lodwin Scolation, Commanding Officer, 2nd Lieutenant Lyria Aurelia, Unit, 2nd Platoon, Bravo Company, 2nd Battalion. Show details? She looked back at the vehicle she was leaning against, and a stream of information came to her. Vehicle: Grappler IFV. Vehicle name: The Condemned. Commander: Staff Sergeant Agzuxiath. Crew: 3. Infantry capacity: 12. Unit: 1st Platoon Echo Company, 2nd Battalion. Show details? Elitaria moved her head around and felt it was good enough and gave another sigh. She was nervous. The senior NCOs, non-commissioned officers, seemed on edge, and when they worried, then it was something truly awful. Everyone else just assumed it was an inspection, the usual battle readiness drills in case of an attack. The grappler ramp of the grappler she was leaning against started to come down, startling her. "Corporal, get off of Echo Company's vehicle," a voice resounded. Elitaria did as she was told and jumped off to see her male Tari Sergeant First Class and the grappler's crew behind him staring at her. "Sarge, I'm sorry, I was just trying to—" Elitaria hurriedly tried to explain while moving to the main body of the platoon. Sergeant First Class Scolation eyed her. "Save it and fall in with everyone else," he chided as the grappler's crew got into their vehicle and started it up. "I need to brief you all on what's happening," he said, deeply frowning. Elitaria could tell Scolation was worried, but Luliandra didn't seem to think so. "What's going on, Sarge? Another inspection?" He was quiet for a while, staring at Luliandra with a hard face. Everyone looked around as they noticed all the grapplers around them were already idling, and their infantry complements started loading in. He was about to say something when the roar of 2 human VTOLs flew over them, heading north. They all noticed they were full of human soldiers, some with their legs dangling off the side of the aircraft. "They're off to do their thing again. I hope the lieutenant is going to be okay," Liliandra said. Skolation tried to ease her anxiety. "Lieutenant Zolnak is going to be fine. It's our new lieutenant, Lady Aurelia, we have to worry about." Elitaria started to complain. "She's a divine peer, and she's straight from the academy." Liliandra opened her mouth to say something, but she was cut off by another flight passing over them. This time there were multiple flights of 5 VTOLs leaving the human side of the base, all full of soldiers. She lost count at 20 before she started getting worried. "Sarge?" Male Tauri were known for their calm, patient, and fearless demeanor. But Sergeant First Class Skolation was anxious. "The Legion is going to—" A female Tauri came bursting out of the barracks in full battle rattle, and carrying too much stuff. "We're assaulting the roads!" Her light gray skin glistened, and long silky hair shined in the morning sun. The gold family crest on her head denoted that she came from a count's family, and an officer's crest on her chest had engraved in it, Second Lieutenant Lyria Aurelia. There was shocked silence as they watched their new lieutenant spill her equipment all over the ground, and turn around to pick everything up as grenades rolled away. Skolation face-palmed as the rest were left gawking at the sight of what she said. He walked over to the lady and helped pack up the equipment that scattered around the ground. He felt frustrated as she was bringing more than necessary. There were grenades, encrypted datapads, extra rations, and another weapon. The sergeant told her, "Lady Aurelia, you don't need all of this." The new lieutenant shook her head. "The academy has taught me well, Sergeant. Look after my troops instead." Skolation sighed. Why the hell does she have a week's worth of rations? They put the extra equipment in the grappler, and Lady Aurelia popped her head out and said, "What are you waiting for? We're deploying!" Skolation focused back on his platoon and barked, "You heard her! Mount up!" The platoon snapped out of their trance, and the 48 soldiers immediately started filling the 4 grapplers. There was a large queue of vehicles waiting their turn to leave the base, while everyone was getting settled in. Lady Aurelia's lap was full of the surplus equipment as she tried to buckle herself in. "How do I buckle this thing?" she muttered to herself. Skolation reached over and pushed her buckle in for her. "Ah, thank you, Sergeant," she said, satisfied. The sergeant forced down a sigh as he told her, "My lady, it would probably be best if you stayed unbuckled. If we come under fire, speed would be key." Lady Aurelia looked at him and said, "Safety is key, Sergeant. Do not worry about me. The academy has trained me well." Once everyone was inside and situated, the ramp started to come back up. Everyone looked at each other in concern. "Lady Aurelia, are we attacking?" An Uville private stuttered. The vehicle jerked into motion, causing Lady Aurelia to drop several grenades, which rolled directly under Liliandra's seat. "Oh, shit," she silently muttered. "That's right, Private. The entire Legion rides to war!" Lady Aurelia said in excitement. Everyone in the grappler looked at each other again. They knew what was coming, especially the veterans. She switched channels to talk to everyone in the platoon. "Soldiers of the Empire, our Legion has been dispatched to take the main supply route leading to that accursed Scourge City. Our mission is to disembark near the tree line and provide cover for our armor as they destroy the enemy." Everyone seemed uneasy as she continued. "Now we have the opportunity to prove ourselves and win glory. When we hit the tree line, I want us to push aggressively." Liliandra and Elitaria turned their head towards Skolation. He locked eyes with them and shook his head. "She's gonna get us killed," Elitaria said quickly so only Liliandra could hear her. Everyone was also whispering to each other as Lady Aurelia kept going, oblivious to the mood. "The Low Marshal has mobilized the entire Legion for a full push. I believe we'll be able to push a full 200 kilometers before the other division will trade places with us." She finished laughing. Inside the grappler was quiet. The number of soldiers that were being committed for this operation was obscene. And they all knew from first-hand experience, or heard from veterans, the cost in terms of life to move a single kilometer into Scourge territory. This particular Legion was a mechanized infantry unit of 45,000. In the previous engagement, they took almost 40% casualties, with more than half of them being killed in action. "Lady Aurelia, I don't think it's going to be as easy as you think," Elitaria said meekly, trying to temper her expectations, but handling divine peers was difficult. The new lieutenant shot a look at Elitaria and said, "Corporal, are you saying I'm wrong?" Elitaria started to regret her actions, but continued. "No, Lady Aurelia, not at all. I was just there for the last assault, and we took a lot of casualties." Skolation was waving his hand at her to stop, but it was already too late. "I know this platoon, no, this legion has been indolent, but now that we have replacement and competent cavalry officers, we will push them back," Lady Aurelia shouted. Everyone soured at her words. She should have kept her mouth shut. The fact she was straight from the academy and was a spoiled divineling, Elitaria just hoped some of them would come back alive. Lieutenant Zolnak's competency made sure most of them survived the last battle, but this new lieutenant was chasing the dragon. Liliandra looked up and rested her head on top of the chair and quietly muttered, "We're so dead." It took hours, but they finally hit Scourge country. The mood was tense as the armored columns fanned out into a layered wedge. It had been half a year since they'd been through here. No one knew what to expect other than that it was going to be a slugfest. They passed burned-out friendly vehicles that littered the place, terrifying reminders that no one was safe, no matter how thick your armor. When the formation hit no man's land, the battalion commander gave the order to dismount and walk with the tanks as they came to a halt. Platoons from other companies were already moving into the jungle to scout it, before they were going to be given the signal to continue their advance. Elitaria and her squad exited the vehicle right next to a destroyed grappler. A kinetic round hit it dead on in the middle, leaving a gaping, molten hole. She wondered if any of the crew made it out okay, but from the placement of the hole, it seemed the spalling would have probably killed everyone. After 20 or 30 minutes, the sign of all clear in the jungle was given as they continued moving at a walking speed. 6 months ago, there was a desperate fighting retreat, and now there wasn't even a soul around. Lady Aurelia spoke over the radio. "They don't need us in the jungle yet. I want us near the forward tanks with the other platoons." Liliandra looked around and found humans in clusters, doing their own thing, and noticed the wide berth between them and their tanks. "I feel like they're staying away from the larger vehicles for a reason," she said. Elitaria added, "They're also talking with battalion and company commanders." Many of the Imperials did not have a particularly high opinion of humans, but Zolnak had told Liliandra, herself, and the rest of the platoon about his experiences with the humans. An hour later and several kilometers in, still nothing. Elitaria and Liliandra were keeping their heads on a swivel, trying to find any threat that might pop up. The pair was nervous. The jungle was too quiet. The only thing they could hear was the human gunships, seeming to loiter far behind them. As they were moving with the rest of the column, they noticed a pair of humans talking to their company commander just ahead of them. The humans were both wearing the oddly patterned uniforms and carrying their strange weapons, but one had a long antenna that was folded on his back. The pair walked past them and overheard their discussion. "They're going to be waiting at the bend and perform an L-shaped ambush. You're going to be needed in the jungle," the other human added. "They're also most likely underground. Infantry out in the open and near tanks like this are going to get fucked by any munitions they shoot at it." The company commander looked at them in annoyance. "There's already almost a battalion here. Regardless of what a battalion says, I don't need your advice." Another new officer. He was transferred from the core worlds, because the last commander had his head taken off. The humans looked at each other and shrugged, as they started to make their way towards the back of the battalion command vehicle. Elitaria felt the human was correct, and was deeply worried by what he said. "They could be under us?" she thought to herself. She quickly grabbed Liliandra's arm and told her, "Get the rest of the squad. I want us to be near the tree line if something happens." Liliandra looked at her, nodded, and ran for the rest of the squad. They made it further than they ever had, and they hadn't even fired a shot, but they were nearing the bend that the human mentioned. Her anxiety started to spike as she squinted, trying to find any sort of movement. She thought she saw some shifting when her radio came to life. "Platoon, we're entering the jungle. The cowards aren't here. Maybe we'll find some there." Her lieutenant scared the life out of her. Why does she have to be so loud? She saw them breaking away from the tanks in front and sighed in relief, but she saw that movement again dead ahead. She brought her weapon's optic up to take a look, and she saw it, a little over 1,200 meters away. A barrel? Point defense lasers on the vehicle started to fire as a mass of missiles rained down on their position. Then the lasers started shooting everywhere the missiles weren't. The lizard's jammers were online. Explosions rocked everyone as the makeshift missile artillery caught everyone by surprise. A missile hit the IFV Elitaria was next to as she was knocked off her feet. Her head was spinning from the concussive blast. She looked around to orient herself and saw the vehicle was burning. "Should've listened to the fucking human," she said as she stood up and started checking herself for injuries. Hell was let loose as the tree line erupted in plasma fire. "Contact in the jungle! They're in the ground!" she heard people yelling over the battalion network. They were being hit in the jungle to the right of the column and ahead, just like the humans said they were. She ran behind the burning vehicle and tried to open the door as she heard yelling inside. Another of her platoon mates ran up, and they managed to get it open as they saw the blood and body parts. And Uvil, the commander, was cut in half. The gunner was in pieces, and the driver was missing a leg, screaming. They both ran in and grabbed the driver to pull him back, as the thunder of the tank's main plasma cannons were hammering the tree line. Every vehicle disabled their point defense as it was shooting wildly, even at the ground near friendly soldiers. Missiles seemed to keep raining down. Most veered wildly off target into the jungle, but sometimes one would land near soldiers. Her radio was going wild as everyone was yelling. Her platoon commander was yelling for them to regroup in the jungle, as 4th Platoon was wiped out immediately in the first few seconds of the ambush. They managed to drag the poor, screaming Tari to medics as they ran back towards their squad. The tanks were pushing forward when that barrel she saw earlier erupted in a blue flash. A makeshift railgun ripped right through a heavily armored tank and into an IFV behind it. The tank's plasma gun must have been hit as it started jetting flames out of the barrel, and out of the hatches as the crew tried to escape while burning alive. She fell in fear as she turned up at the destruction. The crew didn't make it, and it was horrible. She felt someone yank her arm as bolts of plasma were flying past them. She looked up and it was Liliandra dragging her and yelling, "Get up! We have to get to the jungle!" Missiles were raining on top of them, and a flood of plasma fire that was focused on the vehicles came from the bend. They had to get to the jungle and away from these bullet magnets. Elitaria tried to stand up with the help of Liliandra, but slipped and pulled her down right behind a burned-out IFV. It was a mistake that saved their lives, as a mass of plasma bolts were absorbed by the destroyed vehicle. They huddled together as the ground around them turned to glass or exploded. Elitaria looked behind them as the humans were yelling, and saw the loitering human gunships speed towards them. The gunships' autocannons and Gatling railguns on the wings barked to life in a deafening scream. The gunships finished the gun run with rockets slamming into the bend where the lizards were. She peeked around the vehicle in time to see rockets hit the cannon as it erupted into a blue electrical explosion. The humans ran towards them, got behind the vehicles, and fired their loud weapons at the tree line. "You guys need to get into the jungle, now! We need to push them or we're going to get fucked!" one of them said, grabbing her and dragging her into the jungle. She managed to not fall this time as she ran with them. They were passing by bodies. Half of a body they passed belonged to the company commander. Thum! 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 3 massive explosions rocked the tree line the Scourge were in. The tanks and armored vehicles started advancing while still firing their weapons, and the roar of all the gunship's weapons were blaring like endless explosions. One of the aircrafts came back to make a second gun run, and was still moving at high speed, spewing flares. The group just made it to the tree line when she looked back. Thum! She looked in horror as the human gunship's cockpit was rocketed by an explosion and started to come down towards them.